There's one simple thing that nightclubs or festivals could do to make it safer for everyone, and I believe massively reduce medical emergencies. And that would be to go from a zero tolerance approach to drugs to a zero harm approach to drugs. After about 10 years of covering electronic music culture, it's really obvious that this needs to happen. Now, you won't hear this at an industry conference, but drugs, illegal drugs, fuel the nighttime economy. Without illegal drugs, the nighttime economy would look very different. They are a defining factor that shapes dance floors, and it's been that way since the 1970s. And I've met a lot of promoters or nightclub owners that obviously would in private agree to this, but could never say it publicly, and that's fair enough, and that's because they need to protect their license. Apart from like sober parties, which are quite fringe, even though they are growing in numbers, they're still fringe in comparison in the general scheme of things. There's probably never been a nightclub that's been totally devoid of any sort of illegal drugs. To me, that's not a big deal, because the vast majority of people in your average nightclub are using drugs in a moderate and responsible way. I mean, you won't see that in the tabloid news because it doesn't make a good story, does it? Man went to nightclub, had lovely time with friends and got home safe. You know, it's not a story, is it? But that is the reality for the vast majority of people. Look at it this way: of the approximately 3 million adults that take illegal drugs in the UK every year, there are approximately 5,000 drug-related deaths, of which half of them are opiate-related. On the whole, clubbers probably pop half a pill or a pill over the night, rack up about 30,000 steps on their iPhone pedometer, gyrate around a dance floor like a fairground carousel, and then they start to come down. So they usually grab their coat at around 6 AM, say thanks to the security on the way out, and they go about their life. But how can nightclubs help the small minority of people who are genuinely struggling with their drugs? Well, I say by not having to crack down on all the people who are not struggling with their drugs. So at the moment, you've got a tiny minority of people that are struggling with their drugs. Maybe they're using it irresponsibly, maybe they've got issues, they need help with the drugs, you know? But all the efforts and all the resources go into cracking down on every single potential person, even though most people aren't an issue at all in that respect. Imagine if you got all them resources and focused them all on the small number of individuals that do need help. Well, it would probably look a bit different. It means that the people who do need help would actually be able to get the help. And doesn't mean, it means that everyone who isn't causing an issue don't have to get cracked down on. And this is what a lot of people call going from a zero tolerance approach to a zero harm approach. I spoke to Professor Adam Winstock, who specializes in party drugs. He's published over 100 studies on the topic. He said, in the context of zero tolerance, there's zero possibility of having open communication about the risks of drugs. It just shuts down the possibility of having any honest conversation with the punters on how to reduce the risk. That's why we need to move away from it. And when it comes to drugs, licensing conditions in the UK do not make clubs safer. Nearly all the focus is on intimidating clubbers into handing over their drugs rather than harm reduction through education. The scare tactics of securities, bouncers, sometimes club staff could mean those having a dodgy time on drugs are less likely to seek help inside a club before it could potentially lead to fatalities. I don't think licensing should be about drugs at all, Professor Winstock says. It should be about the safety of the patrons. So what would that look like? Well, he added, if you've got a chaotic, dangerous drug use going on in your club, you're going to have ambulances, police and neighbours complaining, he said. If actually you've got people who are drinking and maybe using drugs moderately, leaving the premises not completely off their face, you're not going to have those problems. I think licensing shouldn't necessarily be focused on the activities, but rather the consequences. For example, if we don't have to come, if we don't have to have ambulances called out, if we're not getting complaints, if your place isn't a place where we're getting reports of sexual assault because people are looking out for each other and educating each other, then we're happy. Ultimately, that's what all these laws should really be about. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've seen a lot of clubs lose their licensing over the years because of drugs, but I've never seen any sort of licensing conditions in relation to things like sexual harassment, for instance. Imagine if the licensing wasn't about drugs, it was more about reducing the amount of sexual harassment or sexual assault in the club. And the resources could go from cracking down on every individual to about drugs to sort of like actually cracking down on other things, for instance. It's just not the way it is. Winstock runs the Global Drugs Survey. He started it in 1999. A few years ago, we asked 40,000 clubbers, what's most important to you on a night out at a venue, he told me. Top of the list was free water. The two other most important things were having staff who were trained in recognizing and responding to sexual harassment. So this is obviously something that means a lot to people, but instead we go for the, just all about the war on drugs. And it puts the people that run these clubs in really sort of, they're in a lose-lose situation. I interviewed one guy who runs a club in the north of England, and he said that you have to sort of have a certain amount of drugs in the safe for the police to come and pick up every month, because if there's too many drugs, then you look like a druggy venue, but if you don't give them anything, then it looks like you're sort of like not searching people properly. So he said that he has to try and find this sort of perfect amount of drugs to hand over to the police. And then with sniffer dogs at festivals and stuff like that, studies have shown that they actually increase the harms of drugs, because if people are going in and getting their drugs at the festival, then there's more likely of them getting missold drugs rather than if they get it from their local neighborhood dealer they might have been using for years. So if you sort of create the sniffer dogs, try and take everyone's drugs on the entrance, they're still going to use drugs, but they're going to put themselves at higher risks. So this is just like the topsy-turvy world of the war on drugs. They say it's about making people healthier. No, it's not at all. But on every measure, the drugs are not illegal because they're dangerous. They are dangerous because they're illegal. So if nightclubs moved away from cracking down on everyone all the time to just helping the minority of people and focusing on harms instead of the drug laws, then I think they would be a much safer place for everyone. I think there would be less medical emergencies in these sort of contexts. That would be moving from a zero tolerance approach to a zero harm approach, with education sort of reigning supreme. Of course, you could never completely eliminate the harms. All drugs have the ability to be dangerous, and if you mix them together, they can get more dangerous, but it would look very different. Yeah, if I was putting together a strategy to sort of reduce deaths at music events, at festivals and nightclubs or venues, that's the first thing. The government would have to allow the venues to move from a zero tolerance approach to drugs to a zero harm approach to drugs. I've met enough people that run venues to know that they would all want to do this. It's not the fault of the venue if someone dies there from taking drugs. People take drugs everywhere. People take drugs at sports events, people take drugs at pubs, people take drugs at work in the office, politicians take drugs in the Houses of Parliament. Drugs are a fact of life. Humans are always going to want to change their state of mind through a chemical means. That's the first thing. They should also bring in welfare staff that are totally separate to the security, that can go around the dance floor just looking out for people who might need help with drugs, and obviously testing facilities nearby, very close to the venue, where people can get their drugs tested before they go in. The idea to have it just around the venue rather than inside the venue is that hopefully dodgy drugs would never even get into the venue in the first place. Moving from zero tolerance to zero harm might mean that the searches on the way in are changed slightly, and they're focusing completely on weapons, or maybe people with large amount of drugs, but mainly weapons, and having a bit of a hands-off approach to people who are caught with small amount of drugs. These are all things that if the government allowed venues to do, we could really start to reduce some of these harms associated with drugs.